Hi everybody, my name is Thomas, otherwise known as ASO, and today I'd like to present what I want to call the complete guide to reading and executing vocal paths in Rock Band 4. At the moment, there seems to be an influx of new people who are interested in learning how to read vocals paths and also execute them to achieve top scores, whether this be for rivals purposes, beating friends, or just in general. Hopefully this video will be helpful and provide some clarity to the world of vocals paths, which can definitely look intimidating at first. I'm more than happy to answer any questions in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer as quickly as possible. Before we begin, this video is quite lengthy and covers all areas of vocals, whether you're a beginner or already know a large amount about vocal pathing. Therefore, I have timestamped each section in the description as well as split the video into chapters, so you can skip to the part that is most relevant to you as a player. With that being said, let's start with the basics, how modern paths actually look and some fundamentals that are crucial for getting top scores. First of all, most modern vocals paths look like this. You'll notice that there is a number with a slash next to it. This is an activation, or act for short. This number refers to how many phrases of overdrive you will be picking up before you activate. The letters to the right of the slash refer to the specific place in the song that you'll be activating after you have picked up the indicated number of overdrive phrases. I will explain what each of these combinations mean later on, but the main thing to know here is that the numbers refer to the amount of overdrive phrases you will be picking up before activating. When it's time to activate, always make sure to activate as late as possible by activating just as the line at the tip of your cursor hits the end of the window. This will ensure that you get the longest time in overdrive, which is what you should always be aiming for. There are specific times when you do not want to activate as late as possible, which are marked with a capital E, however this is discussed later in the video. A very important tip to know is how to vibrato. This is where the pitch of your voice will slightly fluctuate around a certain note. Here's an example of what this will sound like in-game. Vibrato is very important, as it speeds up the rate at which you feel the pie, which is almost always necessary to make the most out of every activation. Vibrato can be imitated by lightly tapping your throat whilst holding a note to make your voice bounce around the note. Here is a short example of how this can be done. Credit for this method goes to Killer Kane, who is linked below as he has some great videos showcasing how to execute the vocals paths for the Rock Band 4 disc songs. With the basics covered, we can move to the next section, where to activate. The letters to the right of the slash for each activation explain where you will activate after picking up your specific number of overdrive phrases. Firstly, if you see no letters next to the slash, this just means that you will activate as soon as you see the next window after picking up the required amount of overdrive. For example, 2/, 3/, and 4/. If you see a lowercase s, that means skip, and will tell you how many windows to skip before activating. S1 means skip one window, S2 means skip two, and so forth. For example, 2/S2 means pick up 2 overdrive phrases, skip 2 activation windows, and then activate at the next one. Lowercase p means phrase. This tells you how many phrases to skip. Phrases are simply the sections that the song is split into when playing vocals. For example, 3/P1 would mean pick up 3 overdrive phrases, wait 1 phrase, and then activate at the next possible window. B means before overdrive. This means you will simply activate before the next overdrive phrase. For example, 2/B means pick up 2 overdrive phrases and activate at the next window just before the next overdrive phrase. T means after timer or taps. There's not much to say here, just pick up your overdrive phrases and activate in the window after the next timer or taps. If you see 2 T's next to each other, like TT, wait past 2 taps or timers and then activate in that window. Capital S means squeeze and requires a bit more effort than the rest. This indicates that there is an activation window in the middle of a phrase. In order to maximize the points you get for the phrase, you want to not sing the part before the window, activate, and then fill the entire pie in the part after the window. This will give you 8,000 points for the phrase instead of the amount you would have got if you'd have sung the first part of the phrase without overdrive active. For example, 3/ lowercase s1 capital S would mean pick up 3 overdrive phrases, skip 1 window, and then activate in the next window which happens to be in the middle of a phrase and needs to be squeezed. It sounds complicated, but it's actually very simple in practice. D means during overdrive. This is just capital S or squeeze, but in the middle of an overdrive phrase. It functions the exact same way, so no need to worry here. As a side note, both capital S and D can also have a lowercase x or lowercase x with an exclamation mark added on. This is just to indicate difficulty and mark how hard the squeeze is to pull off without dropping combo, with x exclamation mark being extremely hard to do. On the other hand, S or capital S with a lowercase e or a capital D with a lowercase e means that the squeeze is very easy to pull off. A more rare version of both SX and DX is where a number is added on, such as SX25 or perhaps DX10. This means that the squeeze requires a little bit of the pie to be filled before the activation, as it is impossible to fill it all after the window. The number relates to the percentage of the pie that is recommended to be filled, such as 25% or 10%. Luckily, these acts are usually quite rare, so don't worry too much about them. Sometimes there is lowercase w, which means wait. This is always tagged onto squeeze acts where there are multiple windows within the phrase. If there are 3 windows within a squeeze phrase to activate, W2 would mean wait past 2 of them and then squeeze normally on the 3rd one. Here's an example of this. Lastly, there is AI, which is the easiest one. It quite literally stands for all immediate, which kinda explains itself. You will just activate the first window you see every time throughout the song. Simple as that. Now that you know where to activate and what each the numbers and letters in each activation mean, we can move on to the mini section covering the importance of activating early. Occasionally in paths, you may see a capital E, which stands for early. This tells you not to activate overdrive as late as possible in the window so that you can prevent chaining, which is actually necessary for that specific path. So know how early to activate. There are many different variations of E that refer to certain times to activate within the window. I have annotated a photo above to show the spots at which you would activate for each variation of E. E exclamation mark. Activate as early as possible to not chain. E exclamation mark exclamation mark. This is the same thing, but it can be very difficult to pull off. E 3T. 3 OD ticks before the next note. Just E. Next note hits the start of the OD meter, which is just default. E half. Next note hits halfway point of OD meter. E1. Next note hits the right side, or the end, of the OD meter. E2. Next note hits the left side of the scoreboard. And this weird looking E, which is a rare act, where the notes are off screen. This will always be accompanied by a note detailing how to act, usually a specific time after the last phrase marker by using a stopwatch. Now that we've discussed how early activations work, the next part is understanding splits and split notation. Splits are the sequences of letters and numbers that you find under the path. There is a split for each activation in the path, and this is to show you how much an act can score in terms of points. This is an example of multiple splits in the path for Dreams by Beck. They may look confusing, but truthfully, they're actually quite easy to understand. The first part of a split is the number. This tells you which act the split refers to. Nothing complicated about this. After this number, before the colon, you may see an M, such as 1M, and then the colon. This means that the activation can reach a capped score, meaning that there is a certain number of points you can score in this activation, and doesn't seem to vary much from play to play. If you do not see an M before the colon, this means that the activation can score a certain amount of points, but may vary slightly from play to play, and may also require a bit more effort to obtain the most points possible. After the colon, you will likely see either E or U. This refers to either even or uneven. This only exists to tell you whether the number you should end up with from the split is even or uneven, as it would be too long to write the full number down. This strictly refers to the first 2 or 3 digits in the score, such as the 62 in 62,000 or the 103 in 103,000. Finally, you will see 3 numbers after the E or U. These are the 3 digits you should end up with if you maximize the points available in the activation. If you're at that number, or sometimes maybe more if you're a beast, then you executed that act perfectly. It is important to note that there are 2 types of split without numbers after the colon. These are splits that end in X, or capital M. X means that there are no extra points available and you should gain no added points from the previous split, whereas capital M means that the whole phrase can be captured under overdrive and should also have no added points. Of course, the added points once again refers to the last 3 digits of your score. With the basic split notation understood, this is where advanced split notation comes into play. This is what separates the majority of vocal scores, especially in spotlight songs during Rivals challenges, and is the hardest thing to understand and execute perfectly. Advanced notation refers to the presence of an exclamation mark or 2 exclamation marks on a split, indicating whether the split is hard or very hard to max out. These markings are similar to their purpose in squeeze acts that may be marked with an exclamation mark to emphasize their difficulty. The first thing you may see is a split such as this, or this. This means that the activation can hit a certain score, but it is hard to reach this, usually due to the presence of what is called a mid-verse cap. Mid-verse caps are points in the phrase where the pie will stop filling until you reach another note or part in the phrase. This is to maintain difficulty and ensure that the whole phrase cannot be filled immediately, which would be ridiculous. If you see an act such as this, although it is not always the case, it is very likely that overdrive ends very near to a mid-verse cap and requires a certain technique to break this cap and fill the pie as quickly as possible. In order to do this, you must fill the pie up to the mid-verse cap as late as possible or leave a very small amount of the pie unfilled before the cap. This can be done by not singing a part of the phrase and pausing at a specific section to give yourself just enough time to fill the pie up to a cap before it would normally allow you to begin filling it again. This tricks the game into thinking that the catch-up mechanic is activated and that you are allowed to begin filling the pie faster after the cap, allowing you to score more points and hopefully reach the number listed in the split. This may sound really confusing at first, so here is a clip of this technique in action. Feel free to replay this as many times as you need. It's tricky to execute these acts perfectly, and it can leave you feeling frustrated if you don't get it after a certain amount of runs. However, keep with it, as they are very rewarding and satisfying when done correctly. Finally, there are acts marked with exclamation mark, exclamation mark. These acts are marked as very difficult and almost always require a certain technique known as clipping. Luckily, this is very similar to what we previously discussed with mid-verse caps. Clipping is where overdrive ends just before the first note of a new phrase, but a very small amount of the pie can be filled just before overdrive runs out. However, to do this, you need to perform a technique basically identical to what you would be doing when bypassing mid-verse caps. Otherwise, no extra points will be awarded. What you need to do is fill the pie fully as late as possible before the phrase ends. This can be done by pausing after filling a certain amount of the pie and then pausing again just before the phrase ends, where you are confident that you can fully fill the pie as late as possible without dropping combo. If executed correctly, the game will once again be tricked into thinking the catch-up mechanic is active and will allow the first note of the next phrase to begin filling earlier than usual, allowing for extra points to be obtained. The reason this act is marked as very hard is due to the risk of dropping combo. Of course, if you drop your combo, your run will be over, therefore making this much riskier than bypassing mid-verse caps, where you can still fill the pie fully. Once you perfect both of these, you'll be getting optimal scores in no time. As a final note, there are a few important things to be aware of. The first thing is the 9 pause limit. You have only 9 pauses before your entire score is wiped and your run is dead. Keep this in mind, especially when setting up your clipping and mid-verse cap activations, as too many pauses can kill more runs than you think. For songs full of talkies, which are notes where you sing whatever pitch you want, a fast vibrato is usually the most efficient way of getting the pie to fill up as fast as possible. However, finding the pitch that works for you to perform your vibrato on is personal preference. Some people prefer singing low to vibrato, and others prefer high. Personally, I prefer high, but it's completely up to you to experiment and find what you find most comfortable. Keep your calibration in mind, as the spots where you can activate as late as possible or fill up a pie as late as possible are very dependent on this. Make sure you know your calibration and adjust accordingly. When playing online, do not squeeze. Just follow the path as best as you can. Online is terrible for vocals, and trust me, you will end up doing yourself a favor. For the last point, some paths use old notation called ScoreHero notation. You should recognize this if you see unfamiliar things such as ESF, ESP, SK1, and so on. I have linked a guide to reading old paths below if you do happen to see something like this. However, there are really not that many left, and that's especially not on the path form. And with that, we've reached the end of the complete guide for reading and executing vocals paths in Rock Band 4. I hope that this guide has been informative and at least provided one piece of useful information for you. I've tried to explain as best I can, but I would like to once again say that I will answer any and all questions below in the comments. A like and sub would be super appreciated if you would like to see more vocals content in the future, but until then, thank you for watching and have a good one.